"You're dismissed, Miss Lennox." The words landed in the morning room like a stone dropped into still water. Clara stood beside Lady Marguerite's chair with the book still open in her hands. Page 214, a passage about gardens in winter. And the fire cracked once in the silence that followed. She looked at him. The Duke of Blackwood stood in the doorway with his shoulder braced against the frame, as though the frame were the only thing keeping him vertical. His cravat was loose. His skin had the color of parchment left in rain, not pale so much as bleached, as though something essential had been drawn out of him over weeks and weeks, and he had not noticed, or had not cared. His right hand trembled against his thigh. He pressed it flat to stop it. She watched him do it. He knew she watched him do it. That was the problem. 3 months she had been in this house. 3 months reading to his aunt, managing the linens, replacing the dried lavender in the closets because no one else remembered to do it. 3 months watching the Duke of Blackwood move through his own home, like a man walking through a house that had already burned down, and only he could still smell the smoke. She had said something tonight. She had said it quietly, in this room, with the fire low and Lady Marguerite dozing in her chair, and the Duke standing exactly where he stood now, in the doorway, listening to her read, pretending he was not listening. She had closed the book. She had looked at him, and she had said, "That is not strength, Your Grace. That is grief dressed up as authority. And it is killing you." He had gone white. Not angry white, found out white. The white of a man whose locked door has just been opened by someone who did not even need a key. And now, "You're dismissed, Miss Lennox." Clara closed the book. She set it on the side table beside Lady Marguerite's teacup, aligning the spine with the table's edge, because her hands needed something to do that was not shaking. She smoothed her skirt. She folded her hands. She curtsied. And she made it perfect. Back straight, chin level, eyes on his. The kind of curtsy that is not submission, but a sentence with a period at the end. "Your Grace." She walked past him. She did not touch him. The doorway was narrow enough that she caught the smell of him as she passed. Bergamot and something metallic underneath, something wrong, something she had been cataloguing for 6 weeks without naming it. Her shoulder came within an inch of his chest. She did not slow down. Behind her, Lady Marguerite stirred. "Edmund, what has happened? Where is Clara going?" The Duke did not answer. Clara climbed the stairs to her room on the 2nd floor, east wing, counting the steps as she went. 22. She had counted them the first day she arrived, and every day since. 22 steps between the morning room and the place where she slept. And tonight was the last time she would count them. Her room was small and plain. A bed, a washstand, a wardrobe that smelled of cedar, and the lavender sachets she had hung inside it. Her trunk sat in the corner, already half-packed because a companion's trunk is never fully unpacked. You learn that. You learn to keep one foot in the corridor at all times, because the corridor is where you will end up. She sat on the bed. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed, in and out. She was not going to cry. She was not going to cry because the Duke of Blackwood had fired her for saying a true thing, and she had long ago stopped crying about true things. True things did not need her tears. They stood on their own. A knock. The door opened before she could answer, and Lady Marguerite stood in the hallway in her dressing gown, her white hair unpinned and falling around her shoulders like something from a painting. Whistler's mother, if Whistler's mother had been furious. "He is a fool. He is your nephew. The two are not mutually exclusive. Lady Marguerite entered the room and sat in the only chair, a wooden thing with a cracked arm that Clara had never gotten around to reporting. "I will speak to him. In the morning, when he has had his tonic and his temper has—" "Don't. Clara. He is right to dismiss me. I overstepped." She folded a dress, the grey one, the one without mending, and placed it in the trunk. "A companion does not diagnose her employer. A companion who sees what you see has a duty." Clara stacked her second dress on top of the first. She did not answer. Lady Marguerite watched her pack in silence for a long moment, then rose, crossed the room, and pressed a dry kiss against Clara's temple. Her lips were papery and warm. "The lavender in my closet. You'll tell me where you buy it. I grow it, in the window box. Take what is left." Lady Marguerite nodded and left. The door clicked shut. Clara stood alone in her room, with the trunk open and the lavender still scenting the air, and the silence pressing in from every wall. Then she heard it. Footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Not Lady Marguerite's shuffle, but a heavier, more deliberate tread. Two voices. She recognized both. Pemberton, the Duke's valet, and another man whose voice she could not place. They stopped 3 doors from her room, near the linen closet, and she heard Pemberton say, quite clearly, "The dosage has been adjusted. Another 6 weeks should be sufficient. His Grace's condition will continue to decline naturally." A pause. The other voice, low and careful. "And if the physician, Dr. Hargreaves, sees what I tell him to see, he has been seeing it for 7 months." The footsteps resumed. They passed her door. Clara stood motionless beside her open trunk, with a folded dress pressed against her chest, and her father's voice in her head. Her father, who had been a country physician, who had taught her to read a body the way other men read ledgers, who had once sat her down at 12 years old and made her memorize the symptoms of arsenical poisoning because he had lost a patient to it and never forgiven himself. Trembling hands. She had seen them. Metallic breath. She had smelled it. Pallor that progressed week by week, deeper each time, as though something were being drained. And Pemberton, quiet, loyal, impeccable Pemberton, had prepared the Duke's evening tonic every night for as long as she had been in this house. Clara set the dress down. She opened the small leather journal she kept in the bottom of her trunk, not her father's medical texts, but her own observations, the ones she recorded every night by candlelight, because watching was what she did. It was all she had ever done. It was the thing that got her dismissed, and the thing she could not stop doing. She flipped to the most recent pages. 6 weeks of notes. The Duke's declining color, the tremor in his right hand increasing, the patches of rough skin on his wrists that he covered with his cuffs, the way he pressed his palm against his stomach when he thought no one was watching. She had written on the page dated 11 days ago, "Something is wrong with him beyond grief. I do not know what." Now she knew. She closed the journal. She did not finish packing. She sat on the edge of the bed with the journal in her lap and counted the things she knew. 1. The Duke was being poisoned. 2. The man poisoning him had been his most trusted servant for 15 years. 3. She had just been dismissed from the household and had no standing, no proof, and no one who would believe a companion over a valet. 4. She had said, "It is killing you," and she had meant his grief. She had not known how literal she was. She would leave in the morning. She would leave because she had been told to leave, and because staying would alert Pemberton that she had heard. But she would not leave London. She would not leave him. Clara blew out the candle. In the dark, she counted her heartbeats until she lost track, somewhere past 200. And then she slept. Morning came, grey and wet. Clara carried her trunk down the 22 stairs and through the entrance hall, where the butler held the door, and the maid who had first shown her to her room 3 months ago stood in the corridor and did not meet her eyes. The carriage, a hired one, not a Blackwood vehicle, waited in the street. Rain beaded on its roof. Clara climbed in, settled her trunk beside her, and pressed her hand flat against the window as the carriage pulled away. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched the house shrink. The iron gates, the gravel drive, the morning room window where she had read aloud every afternoon for 91 days. She counted the windows as they disappeared. 14 on the front face. She had counted them on her first day too. The boarding house near Cheapside cost 3 shillings a week, paid in advance. Her room was on the 3rd floor, narrow as a coffin, with a window that faced east toward the dome of St. Paul's. The sheets smelled of soap and someone else's sleep. She unpacked only what she needed: her journal, her father's medical texts, a change of clothes. The rest stayed in the trunk. She opened her father's copy of Orfila's Treatise on Poisons and found the chapter on arsenic. She read it twice, cross-referencing against her journal notes. Chronic arsenical poisoning, progressive peripheral neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress, changes in skin pigmentation, Mace's lines on the fingernails. She stopped. The white lines. She had seen white horizontal lines on the Duke's fingernails 3 weeks ago when he reached across the breakfast table for the salt. She had noticed them. She had written them down. She had not understood what they meant. She understood now. The first apothecary on Fleet Street knew nothing. The second, on Ludgate Hill, was nervous and unhelpful. The third, a narrow, cluttered shop off Paternoster Row with jars of dried herbs crowding every surface, and a proprietor who squinted at her over half-moon spectacles, recognized her description immediately. Fowler's solution, regular purchases, a man of about 50, well-dressed, very particular about the concentration. The apothecary leaned forward. His breath smelled of peppermint and tobacco. "Why do you ask?" "I am assisting a physician." "Which physician?" "A careful one." He studied her. She held his gaze. She was good at holding gazes. It was one of her few marketable skills. And after a moment, he shrugged and pulled a ledger from beneath the counter. His finger traced the entries. "Here, monthly purchases for 7 months. The buyer gives his name as Porter." Not Pemberton. Porter. But the description matched. Tall, thin, grey-haired, a scar across the back of his left hand. Clara had noticed that scar. She noticed everything. It was her curse and her single inheritance. "How much does he purchase each time?" The apothecary told her. Clara did the arithmetic in her head. Her father had taught her dosing calculations before he taught her to ride a horse, and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. At the current rate of purchase, the dose was increasing. 7 months ago, it would have been subtle. Now it was accelerating. She bought a small bottle of Fowler's solution for reference, paid from her dwindling savings, and stepped out into the rain. She stood on Paternoster Row, with the bottle in her pocket and the rain soaking through her bonnet, and counted the weeks. 6 to 8 at the current dosage, if Pemberton maintained the acceleration. 6 to 8 weeks until the Duke of Blackwood died in his own house, attended by his own physician, mourned by his own aunt, and no one would call it anything but natural decline. Unless she stopped it. The first Blackwood carriage arrived on her 3rd day at the boarding house. She saw it from her window, the crest on the door, the matched greys, the footman in Blackwood livery climbing down with a letter in his gloved hand. She watched him enter the building. She heard his boots on the stairs. The knock came. Clara opened the door. "Miss Lennox?" The footman was young, red-cheeked, uncomfortable. "His Grace requests your return to Blackwood House. The carriage is at your disposal." She looked at the letter in his hand. Cream paper, the Blackwood seal in dark blue wax. She did not take it. "Please tell His Grace that I am settled." "Miss, His Grace was quite— I am settled." She closed the door. She pressed her back against it and listened to the footman's boots retreat down the stairs, the carriage door closing, the horses pulling away on the wet cobblestones. She counted the hoofbeats until they faded. One carriage. She spent the next 2 days at the records office at St. Clement Danes, searching parish registers, poor law records, and estate transfers. Her hands were black with ink by the end of each day, and the archivist, a thin man with an enormous moustache and a deep suspicion of women who could read Latin, watched her with increasing unease. On the second day, she found it. Pemberton was not Pemberton. His name was Samuel Price, born in Marston, baptized at St. Andrews, the son of Thomas Price, a tenant farmer on the Blackwood estate. In 1806, the old Duke of Blackwood, the current Duke's father, had enclosed the common lands at Marston. 23 families evicted. Thomas Price had petitioned the court, lost, appealed, lost again, and died in the Whitechapel workhouse in 1809. His wife followed 6 months later. Samuel Price, aged 17, had disappeared from the records entirely, until a man named Pemberton appeared in the domestic service registers in 1811, with impeccable references that Clara now suspected were forged, and entered the employment of the Blackwood household. 15 years. 15 years of pressing clothes and drawing baths and preparing evening tonics. 15 years of patience. And now the patience was ending. Clara closed the register. She sat in the records office with the dust motes turning in the afternoon light and felt the shape of the thing she was fighting. Not a villain, but a wound. A man whose family had been destroyed, who had spent 15 years becoming indispensable to the son of the man who destroyed them, and who was now, slowly, methodically, without pleasure, collecting a debt that was owed. It did not make it right, but it made it comprehensible. And comprehensible things, her father had taught her, were the most dangerous of all, because you could almost talk yourself into forgiving them. She went to Dr. Hargreaves the following morning. His surgery on Wimpole Street smelled of carbolic acid and old upholstery, and the particular staleness of a room where the windows have not been opened in years, because the man who occupies it has decided the air outside has nothing to offer him. Clara sat across from his desk, with her hands folded and her evidence arranged in her mind like instruments on a surgical tray. Symptoms, timeline, chemical compound, motive, and presented her case with the clinical precision her father had taught her. Hargreaves listened from behind a fortress of medical journals and prescription pads. He was a large man, with heavy-lidded eyes, and the particular manner of someone who has spent 3 decades being right and has lost the capacity to imagine being wrong. "Miss Lennox." He said her name the way one says the name of a condition that is beneath diagnosis. "You are suggesting that a valet who has served the Blackwood household for 15 years is administering poison to his employer." "I am not suggesting it. I am describing it. Progressive peripheral neuropathy, Maze's lines on the fingernails, gastrointestinal distress with metallic residue on the breath. These are the textbook presentation of chronic arsenical exposure, and the timeline corresponds precisely with Pemberton's. You are a companion." He did not raise his voice. He lowered it, which was worse. Not a medical man. My father was a physician. Your father was a country doctor who treated farmers and their livestock. I've been the Blackwood family physician for 22 years. His hand moved a prescription pad half an inch to the left, a small, proprietary adjustment, the gesture of a man straightening the walls of his kingdom. His Grace is suffering from nervous exhaustion, compounded by the burdens of his estate, which is a condition I see frequently among the aristocracy, and which responds to rest and a restorative tonic. A tonic prepared by the man I am describing. A tonic I myself prescribed. His voice hardened. The heavy lids dropped another fraction. Miss Lennox, I will be direct. You have been dismissed from the household. You are, I gather, distressed by this. I understand that attachment to one's employer can sometimes produce... I am not attached. The lie sat in her mouth like a stone. I am observant. There is a difference. Is there? It was not a question. She left. The door closed behind her with the solid, well-oiled click of a practice that charged 2 guineas per consultation and did not entertain theories from country physicians' daughters. Clara stood on Wimpole Street in the thin March sunshine and pressed her palms against her skirt and felt the particular loneliness of being right in a city that had decided she was not worth listening to. The physician would not help. The authorities would not listen without physical proof. And the only person who could give her access to that proof was a 73-year-old woman who had already lost too many people she loved. 3 more Blackwood carriages came over the next 4 days. Different vehicles each time, the town coach, the barouche, a curricle driven by the Duke's groom. The Duke was emptying his stables. Clara counted each one from her window. 2, 3, 4. Each came with a letter she did not open. Each left with the letter undelivered. On the 4th carriage, the groom shouted up at her window, "Miss, His Grace says he will send every carriage in London if he must." The landlady, Mrs. Hatch, appeared in Clara's doorway with her arms folded and her eyebrows at an altitude that suggested she had opinions. "A duke sends his carriages and you won't so much as come to the window?" "I came to the window." "You know what I mean." Clara pressed her hand flat against the glass. Below, the groom was circling the curricle in the narrow street, the horses tossing their heads in the February drizzle. "I cannot go back yet." "Yet." Mrs. Hatch caught the word. "Then you will go back." Clara did not answer. She watched the curricle pull away and counted. 4 carriages. 4 refusals. She wondered if he was angry or confused or simply stubborn. And she knew the answer was all 3. And she knew that none of it mattered, because Pemberton was in that house. And every evening he prepared a tonic. And every evening the Duke drank it. And every evening the distance between alive and dead narrowed by another degree. She could not tell him. If she went back and told him, he would confront Pemberton. Pemberton would deny it. The Duke, who had trusted his valet for 15 years, would believe the denial. Because people believe what they have believed, and 15 years outweighs 3 months. And then Pemberton would know she knew, and the slow, careful dosing would become something faster and less survivable. She had to prove it first. She had to prove it beyond what a dismissed companion's word could carry. Clara visited Lady Marguerite on a Tuesday, entering through the servants' door, while Pemberton accompanied the Duke to his solicitor. The aunt was in the morning room, Clara's morning room, the room where she had read aloud for 91 days, the room where she had been dismissed. It looked different. The fire was unlit. Her book, the one she had been reading to Lady Marguerite, sat on the side table where she had left it, open to page 214. No one had moved it. No one had closed it. The page would be foxed by now, exposed to the air for over a week. "He won't let the maid touch it," Lady Marguerite said. She was wrapped in a shawl, smaller than Clara remembered, as though the house were compressing her. "He came in the morning after you left and told her to leave everything as it was." Clara picked up the book. She closed it gently, smoothing the exposed page with her thumb. The paper was soft and slightly buckled. She set it on the shelf. "How is he?" "Worse. He does not eat. His hands shake so badly he cannot hold a pen. Yesterday he fell on the stairs." Lady Marguerite's voice was thin and precise. The voice of a woman who has decided that precision is the last weapon available to her. "Clara, what is happening to my nephew?" Clara sat in her old chair. It still held the shape of her, the cushion indented where she sat every afternoon, and told Lady Marguerite everything. The tonic, the Fowler's solution, the apothecary records, Pemberton's real name, the workhouse, the revenge that had been 15 years in the making. Lady Marguerite listened without interrupting. When Clara finished, the aunt's hands were gripping the arms of her chair with a force that whitened the knuckles. "You are certain?" "I am certain." "And you stayed away, you refused his carriages, to protect him?" "If Pemberton discovers I know, he will accelerate the dose. The Duke could be dead in days instead of weeks." Lady Marguerite looked at her for a long time. Her eyes were pale blue and very clear, the eyes of a woman who had lived 73 years and lost most of the people she loved and was not willing to lose one more. "What do you need?" "I need proof that will hold in front of a magistrate. The chemist's analysis of the tonic itself. But I cannot take a sample without entering the house, and I cannot enter the house without Pemberton seeing." "You can if I invite you for tea." Thursday. Clara returned to Blackwood House through the front door for the first time since her dismissal. She wore her better dress, the brown one, unmended, and carried nothing but a small glass vial in her pocket, wrapped in a handkerchief. The butler showed her to the morning room. Lady Marguerite was there. The fire was lit. Clara noticed this immediately because it had not been lit on her last visit. Someone had ordered it lit today. She was pouring tea when she heard him. Footsteps in the corridor, slower than she remembered. The particular uneven rhythm of a man compensating for weakness by placing each foot with deliberate care. He appeared in the doorway. Her doorway, the one he had stood in when he dismissed her, and stopped. He was worse. She had known he would be worse, but knowing and seeing were different countries, and she was not prepared for the distance between them. His face had thinned until the bones showed beneath the skin, like the frame of a house through weathered clapboard. His color was grey. His right hand, the one that trembled, was hidden behind his back. He wore a coat that no longer fit him. The shoulders gaped. The collar stood away from his neck like a door left ajar. "Miss Lennox." His voice was hoarse. He had not been sleeping. Of course he had not been sleeping. Insomnia was one of the later symptoms. "Your Grace." Silence. Lady Marguerite looked from one to the other and poured a third cup of tea with the serenity of a woman executing a plan. "I invited Clara for tea, Edmund. Sit down." He did not sit. He stood in the doorway and looked at Clara with an expression she could not classify. Not anger exactly, not relief exactly. Something between the two that had no name she knew. "You refused my carriages." "I did." "All of them?" "Yes." "Why?" She held his gaze. She could not tell him why. She could not say, "Because I am trying to save your life and you are making it very difficult by being noble and stubborn, and sending increasingly large vehicles to my boarding house. She could not say, because every time a Blackwood carriage appears on my street, I count it and add it to the list of reasons I cannot sleep, because I was not ready to return. And now, I am here for tea. Something moved in his face, a fracture in the mask quickly sealed. He turned and walked away. His footsteps retreated down the corridor, slow, careful, each one placed like a word chosen by a man running out of language. Lady Marguerite waited until the footsteps faded. Then she leaned forward. The tonic is on the sideboard in his study. Pemberton prepares it at 7 and leaves it. Edmund drinks it at 8. You have 1 hour. Clara set down her teacup. She crossed the morning room, walked down the corridor, and entered the Duke's study. It was smaller than she expected, book-lined, dark, with a fire that had burned to embers, and a desk covered in papers he clearly lacked the steadiness to organize. On the sideboard, a crystal decanter, 2 glasses, and a small brown bottle with a cork stopper. The evening tonic. She uncorked it. The smell hit her. Bitter herbs layered over something she recognized instantly. The faint, almost sweet undertone of arsenic. Her father had described it once as the smell of almonds left in a burning house. She poured a measure into her vial, replaced the cork, pocketed the vial, and was back in the morning room in 4 minutes. Lady Marguerite handed her a biscuit. Clara ate it without tasting it. The chemist on Wick Street, a man named Aldridge who had trained under Professor Christison and owed Clara's father a debt that extended beyond the grave, confirmed it in 2 days. Arsenic trioxide in aqueous solution, masked with gentian root and valerian. Whoever prepared this knew enough to make it taste like medicine. He handed her the written analysis, sealed and signed. Miss Lennox, this is a lethal dose. At this concentration, administered daily, I know. This must go to the authorities. It will. But I need something more first. Clara stood at the window of her boarding house, with the chemist's sealed report in one hand, and the other pressed flat against the glass. Below, a coal cart rattled past. A boy swept the gutter. London continued, as though a man were not dying in a house on the other side of it. She needed the Duke to believe her. Not the magistrate. The magistrate would follow the evidence. But the Duke would need to believe that the man who had dressed him and shaved him and mixed his tonic for 15 years was the man who was killing him. A chemist's report would not do that. She needed Pemberton in a room where his mask would crack. She needed the Duke to see his face when it did. She came back the next day. Lady Marguerite declared that Clara would stay for the afternoon. My eyes are tired. You will read to me. Chapter 12. We stopped at the garden scene, if I recall. The morning room was warm. Someone, not Lady Marguerite, who had not the physical strength to carry logs, had built the fire high and hot, as though anticipating that the room would be occupied. Clara's chair waited for her, the cushion still bearing the impression of 91 afternoons. She sat, opened the book to the marked page, and began to read. She read about gardens, about a woman who planted roses in soil that had been salted by a previous owner, and who waited 3 seasons for anything to grow. The prose was unremarkable, the sort of gentle domestic fiction that Lady Marguerite preferred, and that Clara had come to love for its smallness, its insistence that a life contained within 4 walls and a garden fence could be enough. She shaped each sentence so that it landed clean and whole in the quiet room, the way her father had once told her good medicine should land, precisely, gently, with full knowledge of what it was treating. 20 minutes in, she heard him. Not footsteps. He had learned to walk quietly, or perhaps the poison had made his tread lighter than it should be. A creak of floorboards in the corridor beyond the morning room door. the faintest shift of weight, like a held breath given a body. He was standing just outside the threshold, just beyond where she could see him, and where he could pretend he was passing through on his way to somewhere else. He was not passing through. He was listening. Clara kept reading. She did not raise her voice or slow her pace. She did not perform. She read the way she always read, with precision and warmth, and the particular quality of attention that makes a listener feel the words are being offered, not recited. She read about the woman in the garden, about the salt in the soil, about the third spring, when a single green shoot broke through, and the woman knelt in the dirt and pressed her hand against the earth and wept, not from sadness, but from the specific exhaustion of patience rewarded. The floorboards in the corridor did not creak again. He was still there, perfectly still, listening, the way he had listened every evening for 3 months before he dismissed her, standing in the doorway, pretending the book was what brought him. Lady Marguerite's eyes were closed. Her breathing had slowed to the rhythm of sleep. Clara continued reading for another 10 minutes. For him, not for the art. And when she closed the book, she sat in the silence and felt the shape of what this room could be if the poison were gone, and the grief were named, and the man in the corridor allowed himself to walk through the door instead of standing on its other side. A fire, a book, a woman reading and a man listening, and the quiet that exists between two people who have stopped pretending they do not need each other. She heard him leave. His footsteps retreated toward the stairs, slow, careful. The steps of a man who did not want to be heard leaving, because leaving would confirm he had been there, and being there would confirm something neither of them had said. Clara pressed her hand against the warm cover of the book and did not move for a long time. She came back the day after that, and the day after that. The carriages had stopped, not because he had stopped sending them, but because she was already in his house every afternoon. She counted the total. 7 carriages sent, 7 refused, and then the refusals had become irrelevant because she was walking through his front door of her own volition, and the front door, it turned out, was more devastating than any carriage. On the 3rd day of her visits, she passed him in the upstairs corridor. He was coming from his bedroom. He stumbled. His left knee buckled, a small collapse that he corrected in half a second by gripping the wall. But in that half second, Clara was there. Her hand closed around his forearm. She felt the bone through the fabric. Too much bone, not enough flesh. And she held on. He looked down at her hand. She looked up at his face. Neither of them moved. "Your pulse is elevated," she said. "You can feel my pulse through my coat." "Yes." His hand came up and covered hers. His palm was hot. Feverish, she noted, another symptom, and rough, and it pressed her fingers against his arm with a gentleness that contradicted every rigid line of his body. "You are not what I expected, Miss Lennox. You expected a companion. I expected someone who would leave when told to leave. I did leave. You are standing in my corridor. I came back." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. Just once. A stroke so slight it could have been involuntary. She counted the contact. 3 seconds. Then she released his arm and stepped back, and the corridor was a corridor again, and not the charged, narrow space between two people who had not yet named what they were. "Do not drink the tonic tonight, Your Grace." He frowned. "You said that before. Why?" "Because I am asking you." "That is not a reason." "It is the only one I can give you today." She turned and walked away. She counted her steps. She did not look back. If she looked back, she would tell him everything. And telling him everything would kill him. Pemberton found her in the morning room on the fourth day. Lady Marguerite had gone to rest. Clara was alone, shelving a book, when his shadow fell across the doorway. "Miss Lennox." She turned. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his head slightly tilted, the posture of a man who has been a servant so long that deference is no longer a choice, but a shape his body assumes without instruction. His face was composed. His eyes were not. "Mr. Pemberton, I understand you have been visiting frequently." "Lady Marguerite enjoys the company." "Indeed." He stepped into the room. He moved the way he did everything, quietly, precisely, without wasted motion. "I also understand you have been making inquiries at certain establishments regarding certain purchases." Clara did not step back. She set the book on the shelf and faced him with her hands at her sides and her weight evenly distributed and her breathing controlled. Because controlling her breathing was the first thing she did when she was afraid, and the last thing she would let anyone see. "That is not concern, Mr. Pemberton. That is surveillance." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, at being named so precisely. "I am concerned," he said. "A dismissed companion, lingering near the household, making strange inquiries at apothecaries. It could be misinterpreted. People might think you bore His Grace a grudge." People might. People might think you were the one causing his decline." There it was, the threat, delivered in the same measured tone he used to announce dinner. Clara felt it land, felt the shape of what he was saying. "If you speak, I will say it was you." The dismissed companion with the grudge and the medical knowledge and the access. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at everyone, directly, completely, without the softening that most people applied to hard truths. "That is not loyalty, Mr. Pemberton." She used his chosen name deliberately. "That is grief, dressed up as justice." He went still. "Your father deserved better than what the old Duke did to him. Thomas Price was a good man who worked land that was taken from him by a system that valued enclosure over humanity. He died in a workhouse, and your mother died 6 months after him, and you were 17 years old and alone. And you have spent every day since then becoming someone else so that you could stand in this house and take back what was taken from you." Pemberton's composure cracked. Not dramatically, a hairline fracture, visible only if you were looking for it. His jaw tightened. His clasped hands shifted behind his back. "But this man," Clara said, "is not his father. Edmund Blackwood has never enclosed a common, never evicted a tenant, never sent a family to the workhouse. He's a man who inherited a title and a guilt that was not his, and a house he does not know how to save. And you are killing him for a crime he did not commit." Silence. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. "You are very observant, Miss Lennox." "Yes." "And very alone in your observations. A dismissed companion, a theory about arsenic, a dead father who was a country physician." He stepped closer. His voice dropped. "Who will believe you?" "That depends on the evidence." "Evidence can be complicated. A tonic bottle can be moved. Records can be disputed. And a young woman with no position, no family, and no patron can be made to disappear from the edges of a story very easily." He left. His footsteps were silent on the carpet. 15 years of learning how to move through this house without being heard. Clara stood in the morning room and breathed, Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the bookshelf and counted the spines until the shaking stopped. 14 books on the middle shelf. She had counted them before. She had counted everything in this room. It was the room where she had been happiest, and the room where she had been dismissed. And it was the room where she would end this. She did not go back to Blackwood House the next day, or the day after. She stayed in her boarding house room on Cheapside and spread her evidence across the narrow bed. The chemist's sealed report, her transcription of the apothecary records, the parish register entries, her own journal notes, and built her case the way her father had taught her to build a diagnosis. Symptom by symptom, each one confirmed before proceeding to the next. On the first day, a Blackwood carriage appeared on her street. On the second day, 2 more. On the third day, a rider in Blackwood livery knocked on her door and told her, breathing hard, that His Grace had not slept in 2 nights and would she please come back. She counted. 7 carriages before her visits, 3 more after Pemberton's threat. 10. And she knew, with the certainty of a woman who had catalogued every symptom of a man's dying, that if she did not act tonight, there would be more carriages tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, and eventually the carriages would stop, because there would be no one left to send them. That evening, she did not go back to the boarding house. She went back to Blackwood House. She waited in Lady Marguerite's sitting room until the household retired, and then she walked down the corridor to the Duke's study. He was there. He was sitting at his desk with a pen in his hand and a blank page before him, and the pen was shaking so badly that a constellation of ink spots had formed on the paper where his hand had hovered without being able to land. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. The tonic glass on the sideboard was full, untouched. He had listened to her. He had not drunk it. "Why do you keep coming back?" His voice was low, stripped of the formal distance he had used since her dismissal. "Because you keep sending carriages." "You refused every one." "I did." "Then why are you here?" She could not tell him. Not yet. Tomorrow she would have the full case assembled, the chemist's report, the apothecary ledger, the parish records. Tomorrow she would bring a magistrate and a physician, and evidence that could not be disputed. But tonight, Pemberton had threatened her, and the dose was increasing, and the Duke was sitting in his study unable to hold a pen, and she was so tired of counting things. Carriages, heartbeats, symptoms, days, without being able to say why. She crossed the room. He stood, unsteady, gripping the desk. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the Mises lines on his fingernails, close enough to smell the bergamot, and beneath it, the metallic sweetness that was not cologne, but poison. She kissed him. It was not romantic. It was not calm. It was the action of a woman who had run out of ways to protect someone without telling them why, and chose the only language left that was not a confession. She put her hands on his face. His skin was hot, too hot, the low fever of chronic poisoning, and kissed him, and his hands came up and gripped her wrists, and he kissed her back with the desperate gracelessness of a man who had forgotten that his body could do anything other than fail. When they broke apart, she was crying. She had not cried in months. She had not cried when he dismissed her, had not cried when she found out he was being poisoned, had not cried when Pemberton threatened her in the morning room. But his mouth tasted of nothing. No tonic, no arsenic, just tea and exhaustion. And the relief of it broke something open. He stared at her. He had never seen her cry. "Go to bed, Your Grace. Do not drink the tonic tonight." "You keep saying that." "And I will keep saying it until you trust me enough to ask me why." He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheekbone with his thumb. His hand trembled against her skin. "Why?" "Tomorrow," she said. "Ask me tomorrow, and I will show you everything." She left his study. She walked down the corridor and counted her steps, 14 to the staircase. And she did not look back, because looking back was something she allowed herself only when the danger was over. And the danger was not over yet. Morning. Clara arrived at Blackwood House at 9 o'clock with 3 people. Aldridge, the chemist, carrying his sealed report. A magistrate named Holloway, arranged through Lady Marguerite's connections. And Dr. Hargreaves, who had been summoned by a letter from Lady Marguerite that read, in its entirety, "Come at once, bring your instruments, and prepare to be wrong about everything." The morning room had been prepared, fire lit, chairs arranged. Lady Marguerite sat in her usual place with the composure of a general who has spent the night reviewing maps. The Duke sat beside the window. He looked like a man who had not slept, because he had not. But he also looked like a man who had stopped drinking poison 12 hours ago, and even 12 hours made a difference. His hands were steadier. His color, marginally, had shifted from grey towards something that might, in good light, be called alive. "What is this?" He looked at Clara, at the 3 strangers, at the sealed documents in her hands. "This is the reason I stayed in London. This is the reason I refused your carriages. And this is the reason I told you not to drink the tonic." She laid it out, all of it. The apothecary records showing 7 months of Founders Solution purchases by a man matching Pemberton's description. The chemist's sealed analysis confirming arsenic in the evening tonic. The parish records identifying Pemberton as Samuel Price, son of an evicted tenant farmer. The progression of symptoms matching chronic arsenical poisoning. Dr. Hargreaves, to his credit, went white. He took the chemist's report, read it twice, and then sat down heavily in a chair that creaked under his weight. "I prescribed that tonic. Pemberton mixed it. I trusted." He stopped. "You trusted." Clara's voice was quiet, not accusatory, not triumphant. "You all trusted. That is not a failing. He was very good at being trusted." The magistrate asked for Pemberton to be brought in. He came. He entered the morning room in his valet's coat, with his hands clasped behind his back and his posture impeccable. And he saw Clara and the chemist and the magistrate and the documents spread across the table. And he understood. His face changed. Not dramatically. A settling. The way a building settles when the last support is removed. Not a collapse, but a slow downward shift of everything that had been held in place. Clara stood. She did not look at the magistrate. She looked at Pemberton. "Your name is Samuel Price. You were born in Marston. Your father was Thomas Price, a tenant farmer who worked the eastern fields of the Blackwood estate for 22 years. In 1806, the old Duke enclosed the common lands. Your father lost his tenancy. He petitioned and was denied. He entered the Whitechapel workhouse in 1808. He died there in 1809. Your mother died 6 months later." Pemberton said nothing. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on a point above Clara's head, as though he were looking at something she could not see. "You entered service under a false name in 1811. You spent 15 years earning the trust of this household, and 7 months ago, you began administering arsenic in the evening tonic." Still nothing. "You are not evil, Mr. Price." She used his real name. "You are in pain. You have been in pain for 20 years, and you found a way to make the pain mean something. But this is not justice. This is not even revenge. This is a man dying for something his father did, and you know that he is not his father. Pemberton's composure broke. It was not the hairline fracture she had seen before. It was the whole surface giving way. His shoulders dropped, his hands came out from behind his back and hung at his sides, and his face, which had been a mask of practiced deference for 15 years, became the face of a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and had just been told he could set it down. "He enclosed the common," Pemberton said. His voice cracked. 23 families. My mother walked 9 miles to the workhouse with my sister on her back, and my sister died on the road. My father dug the grave with his own hands because the parish would not pay for a burial. The room was silent. "I know," Clara said. "I read the records. Every one." "Then you know what was owed." "I know what was owed. And I know this man did not owe it." Pemberton looked at the Duke for the first time. The Duke looked back. His face was unreadable. Not cold, not angry. Something deeper than both. Something that lives in the place where inherited guilt and personal innocence collide, and neither one knows how to speak. "My father was a monster," the Duke said quietly. "I have known it since I was 12 years old. I have spent my life trying to be something other than what he was. And I have been failing." "You have not been failing," Clara said. She said it to both of them. "You have both been fighting the same ghost. You have both lost." The magistrate cleared his throat. The legal process was not interested in ghosts. The Duke rose from his chair. He crossed the room to where Pemberton stood, to where Samuel Price stood, and stopped in front of him, close enough to see the scar on the back of his hand, close enough to see the man behind 15 years of impeccable service. "You're dismissed, Mr. Price." The words landed differently this time. When the Duke had said them to Clara, they had been a wall thrown up in panic. When he said them to Pemberton, they were a door being closed with terrible, quiet precision. The same 2 words, a different ending. Pemberton was escorted out. He went quietly, as he did everything, without resistance, without noise, without the drama that Clara suspected he had never once permitted himself in 20 years of grief. At the door, he turned. "The lavender," he said to Clara. "In the linen closets. I noticed it the week you arrived. My mother grew lavender." Then he was gone. The morning room emptied. The magistrate left with his notes. The chemist left with his report. Dr. Hargreaves left with his humiliation and a new prescription that did not contain arsenic. Lady Marguerite left with the measured tread of a woman who has saved her nephew's life and intends to take a nap about it. Clara and the Duke remained. The fire was burning well. The book she had been reading to Lady Marguerite was on the shelf where she had placed it days ago. Closed now, the foxed page smoothed, the spine aligned with its neighbors. The morning room was warm. Clara stood beside the fireplace, and the Duke stood beside the window, and the distance between them was 8 feet, and 15 days of carriages she had not boarded, and truths she had not spoken. "How many carriages did I send?" 10. He looked at her. "You counted?" "I always count." "And every time you refused?" "You were trying to keep you alive, yes." He crossed the room. Not quickly. He was still weak, still recovering, still a man whose body had been poisoned for 7 months. But steadily. He stopped in front of her. He did not kiss her. He took her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, over his heart. She felt the beat through his shirt, through the wool of his waistcoat, through the thin cotton of her glove. She counted. 72 beats per minute, slower than before, steadier, alive. "Stay," he said. "That is not a question." "No." He held her hand against his heart. His eyes were clear for the first time since she had known him. Clear the way a window is clear after someone has finally opened it. "It is not." She stayed. 6 months later, the morning room was unrecognizable. Not physically. It was the same room, the same fireplace, the same windows facing the garden where the roses were beginning their second bloom. But the dust covers were gone. All the chairs were uncovered and occupied, or available to be occupied. The fire burned every day now, even in summer, because Lady Marguerite preferred the warmth, and Clara preferred the sound, and the Duke preferred whatever Clara preferred, though he would have rather had his other hand poisoned than admitted this aloud. Clara sat in her chair, with its indentation in its place, reading aloud. Not to Lady Marguerite, who was asleep in her corner with a shawl over her knees and a cup of tea going cold on the table beside her. She was reading to the Duke, who sat across from her with his legs stretched toward the fire, and colour in his face, and weight on his frame, and his right hand resting on the arm of the chair without trembling. She had married him in April. The ceremony was brief. 12 minutes, she had counted. And afterward they had walked home through the garden, while Lady Marguerite threw dried lavender instead of rice, because, she said, rice was for people who lacked imagination. Now Clara turned a page, and the Duke reached across the space between their chairs and placed his hand over hers on the book. She stopped reading. "You never told me," he said. "Told you what?" "The night you kissed me, in the study. Why were you crying?" She looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at everyone, directly, completely, but also the way she looked only at him, with the particular attention of a woman who had spent months cataloguing the symptoms of his dying, and now catalogued, with equal precision, the signs of his living. The colour in his lip, the weight in his hand, the 72 steady beats per minute that she felt every night when she pressed her ear against his chest in the dark. "Because you tasted like nothing," she said. "You tasted like nothing, and it meant you hadn't drunk the poison, and it was the first moment I knew you might live." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, one by one. She counted. 4 kisses, 1 for each knuckle, and she would have counted more, but he pulled her from her chair and into his, and the book fell to the floor, and she laughed against his collarbone, and it was the only time in 6 months of marriage that she lost count of anything. The morning room held them. The fire burned. On the shelf, the book lay closed, its pages unmarked, waiting for tomorrow. In the garden below, lavender grew along the south wall. Clara had planted it in May. It grew in the same soil that had once belonged to the common lands of Marston, before enclosure, before eviction, before 20 years of grief had taught a man to poison instead of plant. Now it grew. It bloomed. It scented the linens and the closets and the morning room where a woman who never cried sat in a duke's lap and laughed, and a duchess who had once curtsied perfectly would never curtsy again, because she no longer needed to perform dignity. She simply had it. If you have ever refused to leave someone, even when they told you to go, even when every reasonable voice said walk away, because something in you knew they needed you more than either of you could say aloud, then you know Clara's story. You know the weight of staying when it costs you everything, and the cost of leaving when everything in you says remain. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have gotten in the carriage, or would you have counted them from the window? And if you lied, subscribe, settle in, and I will see you in the next story.